the last time that we had this amazing guest on Shrink Chicks. She is a sex and stress educator, researcher, activist, and award-winning author who has a brand new book, Come Together, The Science and Art of Creating Lasting Sexual Connections. Welcome back, Emmalee Nagoski. We are honored to talk to you again today.
I'm so excited to talk to you again.
Oh, we're so thrilled.
Okay, so I'm just going to say this. I learned so much from this book. Come Together has already changed my life. Although I was really floored to hear that the internet says queefing is when a small unicorn inside your vagina sneezes. I didn't know that until this. So I know there was a lot I took from this book, but also who would have
the
known?
most important lesson.
That's the thing that actually changed
100,000 words of
her
affective
life.
neuroscience. Queefing is a unicorn. Yeah. In your vagina.
I didn't.
Beautiful.
Is that a Gen Z thing, or did I miss it? That's amazing. It's the funniest thing I've ever seen.
I don't know. I probably saw it on Tumblr sometime in the 2010s.
In the 2010s.
Tumblr was pretty hot then. So you have this amazing new book out. We're so excited. It's amazing. So tell us a little bit about what inspired Come Together.
Right. Yeah. So what inspired it is what happened to my own sex life while I was writing my first book, Come As You Are. Which is, you might think that thinking and writing and talking and reading about sex all day, every day could be really hot. It's not. I was so stressed and exhausted that I lost all interest in actually having any sex with my husband, to whom I'd been married for like a year and a half.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I finished the book, things got a little better. Then I went on book tour, things got a lot worse. And I would try to follow my own advice. In Come As You Are, in the desire chapter, I talk about responsive desire, where what you do is you put your body in the bed, you let your skin touch your partner's skin, and in response to that pleasure, your brain's going to go, oh, right, I really like this. I really like this person. What a good idea. And instead, I would put my body in the bed. I would let my skin touch my partner's skin, and I would cry and fall asleep. And I thought, well, I need more information than I put in my own book. So I did what anyone would do. I went to Google Scholar and I looked at the peer-reviewed research on how couples sustain a strong sexual connection in the long term. And what I learned there made completely irrelevant the entire mainstream sort of cultural discourse about sex and long-term relationships. Because in particular, at that time, we're talking between 2015 and 2020, there's this big cultural discourse that's like, is intimacy the enemy of the erotic and you need distance in order to keep the spark alive? Or is intimacy the key to the erotic and you need closeness to keep the spark alive? And when researchers actually talk to people who had great sex lives, they don't talk about spark. Spark is not the point. They don't talk about spontaneous desire. They don't talk about being horny for each other. They talk about pleasure. They talk about authenticity and vulnerability and empathy. They talk about connection. And above all, they talk about pleasure. Turns out the whole conversation people were having was irrelevant. And if we stay focused on like, how do I keep the spark alive? How do I increase desire in my long-term relationship? We have a goal that is distracting us from what a great long-term sex life actually is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Emmalee, I love that you used your own life as a tool. Because I really think that's where like we do the best kind of research, is like using your life as a tool to get deeper and figure out, okay, like how else can I build off of this?
Right. Yeah. And so if it crosses your mind, but Emmalee, did writing Come Together do the same thing to your sex life that writing Come As You Are did? The answer is yes. Yes. 100%. And it did it while I was perimenopausal this time, because it's 10 years later.
Fun.
Yeah. So yeah, perimenopause I have not had the most difficult time, but I have not had the easiest time.
Mm-hmm.
And also long COVID.
Oh,
which
shit.
Sucks. Like it sucks so much. So I get done. I finished writing this book last summer. And I'm like, just like, I have totally destroyed our sexual connection again. And now I'm perimenopausal and I have long COVID. And like the best thing I can say about the book is like, sure, I destroyed our sex life, but now I have 100,000 word book of like how to fix it.
Yeah.
So we've been following my own advice, and I have to say things are better than they have been our entire time together.
Wow.
Because we have this shared language, because, like you mentioned before we start, like, we can be more playful about it. There's so much less pressure. I don't have to take myself so seriously or put so much demand and expectation on myself. So, like, I want the book to help many, many people, but even if no one else ever read it, it would be worth it for me to have written
Yeah.
it because now I have this thing I can always turn to when things feel like they're not going right.
Yeah.
Well, and it's just, I think it's just so relatable to hear, right? Like you're as a sex researcher, someone who writes about this, to say like this is also difficult in my own relationship. Like we experience that as couples therapists too, right? To feel like, okay, because you have all of this research, all this knowledge that like things should be perfect, but
Uh-huh.
it's so relatable to hear. Of course they're not, like you're human.
Yeah.
You go through this too. And so, but the fact that you were able to like take your book and use it as a tool to kind of bring you guys back together sexually.
And there was before I started writing it, there was a part of me that was like, am I going to be undermining my authority if I acknowledge
Mm.
in public that, like, just because I know all these things doesn't mean my body is always like on board and ready to go. Um, my literary agent, Lindsay, who is a delightful, spectacular human being, was like, no, Emily, it is so reassuring to know that even a quote unquote sexpert can still struggle with these things. It is
Mhm.
so reassuring. And then my editor said the same thing. And I was like, okay, well, let's do it then. And I have heard from so many other sex therapists and educators. I did a presentation at a grad school for social workers and public health grad students, and they were all like, it is so good to hear someone say out loud that, like, you can be studying this and you can be a professional in this, and that doesn't mean everything goes 100% right for you all the time.
Yeah. I think you do such a tremendous job throughout the book, like normalizing not being interested in sex right now.
Right.
And as someone, when I read this, as also someone who's going through IVF, and I've
Ooh,
had a ton of difficulty having my first daughter that I have. You just don't want to have sex sometimes, right? Like you have a really great case study, which I know it's not a case study, these are real people, but you have a really good example about a couple that like has gone through fertility stuff of this. And I think people have this idea and they create a story about other people's relationship with sex. And all of this is like the myths and narratives, especially in a very patriarchal society,
yep.
um, which about how we're supposed to feel about sex and how we're supposed to feel about sex and marriage and what we owe to each other in regards
Hmm.
to our bodies, which is a very, very complicated conversation to have. But you use this really good line that I want to take to move forward in this is you said you talk about you don't have to be in the mood for your bet to plan your best friend's birthday party,
Right.
right? But you don't need a fucking mood, but you need to care and it needs to matter to you.
Yeah.
That for me was like, oh my gosh.
And if it doesn't matter to you, it doesn't have to matter.
Yes.
And it's allowed to matter to you.
Hmm.
And mattering matters more than like feeling horny.
Yes. Okay. So
I have to say, like, as I'm saying that out loud, like, it makes me a little emotional because I know for sure that me having that message for my own husband while I'm struggling, like, I'm like, it matters to me. I am working on it. Let's work on it together.
yeah.
It matters to me, and I'm not fucking there.
Yes.
Uh,
Yeah.
the fact that he knows that it matters to me and I am working on it and like I'm on my way helps. So I realize that, like, me, the sound of me pounding my fist while I'm saying that is maybe not the most appropriate, but like it helps so much if your partner knows that it matters to you. And just because you're too stressed out, you're too exhausted, you're too fucking broken from shit happening to your body, doesn't mean that it doesn't matter to you anymore. And you
Yeah.
are interested in doing what's available to your body right now.
Mm,
That I think that piece of it is really important, right? Because I think there's so many emotions that get wrapped up in sex, like the rejection, the right. If and so for you to be able to, and for anyone to be able to communicate that, like this is so important to me. I'm reading a book about it, right? I'm like doing the work to
Right.
really be engaged in this.
I have this book. I am trying. This is literally like,
I think
I want
it
this.
means
Yes.
so much to the
Well,
relationship.
And it does, and especially for those of us who are born and socialized as women, however we identify now, there's a part of like, yeah, I do this idea of what we owe, but what we're obligated to do. And we
Yeah.
cannot forget how many women have history of sexual trauma,
Hmm.
and how we can say, I want to have this badass sex life that we both love. And I also have this entire fucking life of shit that has affected me.
Right. Exactly.
Right. And you talk so much about the context, which you also did in such an amazing way, as Come As You Are, which is really life changing for me and so many of my clients. But I think there's something really interesting. Obviously, we have to talk about the floor plan, right?
Oh
And
God, yes.
we had to talk about the floor plan, right? And sometimes I never know. We have people on talking about their books. I'm like, how much do you want to give away? Because you should buy this book too. So even if we talk about this, you still have to buy the book,
Yeah. The
everyone.
floor plan is the
Yeah.
idea that changed everything for me in my own life, but it is the most complex piece of affective neuroscience that I've ever written about, and it takes me 2 whole chapters. So anything I say here is not going to be the whole thing.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
And let us just say, Emily, before you even got on, we were talking about your book and how you're able to explain science in a way that is so palatable and relatable. And I can, while I'm reading it, I can hear you talking, like you hear your
Oh, good.
voice in it.
Yeah.
And so I think it's just incredibly, incredibly helpful, to have your book in comparison to like dense, heavy science.
Yeah.
Um, so let's just dive into it. Can you
Okay.
tell us about the emotional floor plan? Take us into it.
Right. So the idea of the emotional floor plan is a metaphor for the structure of our emotional brains. So let's imagine that there's a bunch of spaces, like emotional spaces that you can be in your brain. One of them, can you believe it's 2024 and we don't have like one scientifically agreed on model of
It's
how
insane.
human emotion works? There's at least 3 big competing models, and I picked the one that includes sex, which I think says something. Someone asked me once, like, why does only one include sex? Just gestures wildly at the world. Why do you think? Um, so I picked that one. So let's start with the lust space. So these are the universal mammalian emotional spaces, right? And the lust space is where courtship and sex happens. This is where like all the arousal processes and that sense of sexual pleasure happens. Now, there are 3 other, I'm going to call them pleasure favorable emotional spaces you can be in. And let's talk about the one I already mentioned, which is the play space. Play is the universal mammalian motivational system or mental emotional space of friendship. So if you have like pets, dogs, cats, I'm a dog person. So when my dog goes and like puts her elbows on the ground and her ears go up and her mouth is soft and open and her eyes are bright, that's a play bow. That is an invitation into the play space, where play is any behavior we engage in for its own sake, just because everybody involved likes it and there is nothing at stake. And we can see it in other animals. We can see it in children. There's so many different kinds of play. Humans in particular, play is so important for us. There's rough and tumble play, which like dogs, rough and tumble play. Children, rough and tumble play. Adults, sex, rough and tumble play. Absolutely, it can be. There's a story play where, like little kids will be like, I'll be the teacher, you be the student. There's adult story play. I'll be the teacher, you be the student, right? If there's story, you're shifting into this play space where there is nothing at stake. You have nothing to lose. Everything is intended to be just fun and feel good. So the third kind of play, object play. Object play, you get this with like toddlers when they discover bathwater. Is like, what is this bath? They're splashing, and like, what is it? They figure out that like they can splash it, and they transition from what is this to what can I make this do? Then they realize they can make the water splash you, and it's obvious. What if our relationship to our partner's genitals is not like, I need to like make this happen for my partner, or I need to like be good at, but like, what can I make this do? What happened to, how does it feel when I do this? How does it feel to you? How does it feel to me?
Mm.
There's no pressure. There's no performance there, the man. They're just like, what does this do? what can I do with this? Without there being expectation or obligation, without there being anything at stake. Nobody has anything to lose. You are just playing.
Mm.
So that's the space number 2. And third space that is it's a pleasure favorable space, is very often adjacent to the lust space or the play space, is the seeking space. This is curiosity and exploration and adventure. And for some people, it's adventure out in the world. Like I have friends who sold all their stuff and traveled around the world. Sounds like a nightmare. Like I would hate it. But they loved it. They loved it. So stuff went wrong all the time. And the collaborative experience of solving those problems together, the sense of adventure and new experiences, was for them like there's a doorway directly from that into the lust space for them. For some people, it's learning new things. For me, talking about affective neuroscience is just like a slide on a playground right into the lust space
Sexy.
for me,
Yeah.
right? And for some people, it's going to be like going to art museums. It's going to be like learning new recipes and cooking or whatever creative, exploratory, adventurous, novelty seeking experiences can open up the door to feeling like really connected in a like sexual kind of way. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
There's one other pleasure favorable space, and it's the one that's more complicated, which is why I save it for last, and that's the care space. For a lot of people, there's a feeling of being cared for, of like your needs are being met, you're being held, someone is being really attentive to you and attuned to you. This is the like cuddling on the couch in front of the fireplace with your body close to your partner, that kind of experience for a lot of people. That like that couch you're sitting on just like unfolds into like a sexy lust bed right there. Like they're so close together. And that is one of the, I think of care is so huge in human brains. I think of it as being like an open floor plan space, just because it's so huge and it has so many different characteristics. I think there's like the living room caring for space, and then there's the sort of kitchen taking care of space, which is like this is the childcare version of taking care of, where you like have to meet this other person's needs in order to keep them alive because like this is your person whose job it is to keep them alive. And it's very intense. It's usually very stressful. The stakes feel really high. And you, even though this other experience of care where you feel cared for and like you feel motivated to care for someone can be adjacent to lust, this taking care of version is not close. And for a lot of people, especially people, if you get like gender socialized, you get raised as a girl and you grow up to identify as a woman, like you have been taught that it is your job to meet other people's needs. If you are like trapped in that kitchen of care, there's probably not a very direct path from that kitchen into the lust space. And you're going to have to collaborate with your partner to find a way out of that kitchen through whatever space you have to go through, because this is a space that's got at least 7 separate spaces in it. That's a lot of different rooms. Like you're going to have to go through some other room, maybe the caring for version of care, before you can get to the lust space.
Like mine feels like staircases away when it comes to care.
Yeah.
I think especially because so much of my experience with sex in the past was about other people's pleasure and caring for them sexually and what I owe to people. So for me, like, you
Yes.
know, like, and I it would be interested. I'm sure there's no fucking research on this because God forbid. But we had research of like how much people that are socialized as men feel this versus women, because care for me is like, oh, bar.
Yeah. Yeah. So different people draw their floor plans in different ways. My floor plan is like a ranch house. One person drew it as a townhome. So like each level is pretty small, and you like, so all of her pleasure adverse spaces, which are the ones we haven't talked about, those are fear, rage, and panic grief, which is loneliness, depression, shame. Those live in panic grief. Those are all like in the basement, right? And then she's got like the care space on the main floor, and the second floor is play and seeking, and up on the roof is where you get lust. So if she's in that care space, she's got 2 flights of stairs to climb before she's going to get to the lust space.
Yeah.
Oh, that's what I relate to.
Yeah. Can you take us into those adverse
Yes.
kind of
So
emotions too? I'm
this
sure
is
there's so many
so
people who feel that.
there's yes. Our lives are such that we actually spend a whole bunch of our time in these pleasure adverse spaces.
Yeah.
The easy ones to talk about are fear and rage, because that's fight or flight. All of us have kind of heard about like the stress response, fight or flight response. Fight is rage. The motivation there, this is the mammalian motivation to destroy something that's in your way. It's where everything from slight irritation and annoyance through frustration to anger to hate lives in the rage space. Um, all of those feelings of like, this is in my way and I need to destroy it. That like all of your like, it's not fair. Those feelings, just big plastic tubs of like, it's not fair accumulated over the course of your life, live in the rage space. And if you're in this space, this is another one where like, if you're angry, especially if you're angry specifically with your partner, there's not a direct path from the rage space into the lust space. You got to go through somewhere else. And then the fear space is familiar to a lot of people. It's everything from slight worry to anxiety, through fear to terror, just like every kind of, this is the motivational system of like, I need to escape, I need to get away, I need to run away. There's a threat and I need to not merely avoid it, but escape it, as opposed to rage, which is I need to destroy it. Rage is an approach motivation. I need to move forward and like make it disappear. Fear is I need an avoidance motivation. I need to get away from it, create as much distance between myself and it as possible, which you can't always do. So for example, my story, right? I would like get in the bed and let my skin touch my partner's skin. I was so stressed. I was just like bouncing against the walls of the fear space in my brain. I was in this state where I was interpreting everything as a potential threat. I was so worried about whether I was doing enough and was I doing it right? I'd never written a book before. I was like constant high intensity stress. And like my skin would touch my partner's skin in that state. And like I write in chapter 4 of Come As You Are, and chapter fucking 1 of Burnout, connection is one of the most valuable and evidence-based strategies for completing the stress response cycle in your body. So my skin touches my partner's skin, and instead of going, ooh, sex, my body goes, oh, I'm safe now. I'm safe. I can relax. I can complete the stress response cycle. And the crying was my body being like, I can let this go. I'm safe now. I can let this go. Like, I don't need to worry, which is great, but it's not sexy. So where was I? So I get out of the stress, out of the fear space through the crying and the holding, which is like my partner's so great and patient, like lovely. And so I get out of that. And then where am I? Well, then I was in a space that's not even like an emotional floor plan space, because not everything is feelings. Like I also have a body, and my body was exhausted. So nap, and then generally a snack and probably a bath, right? And just like take care of my body. And then I can find my way to one of the spaces that's adjacent to the lust space, which was play. Honestly, like I get myself to the play space, and then everything's good. That is how it's easy for me to get to the lust space. The goal here is to know how to get to the room next door to the room where it happens. Do, 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 do. It's a Hamilton reference. You want to get to whether it is play, seeking, or care, like find your way to whatever space feels adjacent to the lust space and allow your brains to transition into the lust space. So the last one is panic grief, which is the one we talk about least. It's where loneliness lives. It's where shame lives. It's where depression lives. Sadness, isolation, a sense of feeling trapped and obligated. All of those live in the panic grief space. And the mammalian origins of this are actually related to the care system, to the attachment system. Human beings are born much too early. We cannot meet any of our own needs. Like, a baby giraffe is born and hours later it's running. A baby human is born and it takes literal years before they can run competently away from a predator. Years. So like our attachment system is intensely powerful, which is why it takes up so much space in our brains. So an infant human, if it has a need that it needs to be met, it will have this panic response, which is the crying of an infant. You can think about it that way. And hopefully an adult caregiver comes along and helps to meet that need. Phew. But if the infant goes so long for so just keeps crying and the need keeps being unmet, at a certain point, the brain will shift gears from thinking I need to get this need met to I'm never going to get this need met. And it will push the baby off an emotional cliff into a pit of despair, which is where the grief happens, panic grief. Sadness of like I'm alone forever and I'm never going to get this need met. And you get the sort of like, you know, the difference between like the panic crying of an infant versus the like the wailing despair of like helplessness. And adult human brains have the exact same experience. They call it heartbreak for a reason. When you lose your attachment object, even as an adult, when your life no longer depends on your adult caregiver, on your attachment object coming when you need them, your body doesn't know that. So it responds with like this huge, like, I feel like I'm going to die kind of feeling. Shame is, and the social exclusion emotions are here because where rage is, I want to destroy it. Fear is, I need to escape. Panic grief is, I need help. I need belonging. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It makes so much sense. And it, you know, I can imagine that like anyone listening to this is as they're relating to kind of these really difficult emotions, you know, and like how to move from one room to the other.
Mhm.
How do you get yourself from, you know, kind of these spaces, these adverse spaces? And you mentioned, you know, when you were in that adverse space of completing that stress response cycle, needing to take care of yourself, and then moving into the other spaces. Can you take us into that a little bit? Because
Yeah.
I just think it's so relatable to be in a lot of these adverse spaces. And then like, okay, well now how do I move into that less space? Like that it
Yeah.
almost feels like a mansion.
Well,
Yeah, yeah, it's so
it's our anniversary, so I gotta go have sex or something. Like,
Right.
there's so much
Right.
pressure around this.
Yeah. And so I have in workshops and in online surveys, I've asked people like, what are things that you like when you like sex? What are things that you don't like when you don't like sex? What are things that you want when you want sex? What are the things that you don't want when you don't want sex? One of the number one things people do not want or like when it comes to sex is a feeling of obligation.
Mm.
So, I mean, people like us, we talk about scheduling sex, right? I talk about
Yeah.
scheduling
Yes.
sex,
Yes.
right? But if scheduling sex leads you to feel like, well, now I have to,
Yeah.
having to, remember, it's play. You're there not because you have to. It's not your job. You're there because it's a game that you're playing because everybody involved has fun because you like it. If you do not like the sex you are having, don't have that sex. Don't have sex you don't like. Like this is my radical vision for the world that all of us only ever have sex that we enjoy. And
Mm.
here's the wild part, we don't even feel bad for not having sex we don't like.
Wow.
No, I don't want to have that sex. I don't like it.
Ooh.
So, yeah. So even though I talk about scheduling it, if it feels like a sense of obligation, that's not the approach for you. So, but scheduling works for like, I'm busy. If a thing is not on my calendar, it's not going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I know people are like, well, if we have to schedule, if it doesn't happen spontaneously, if it's not natural, then my partner doesn't want me enough. Let me say, like, we're both busy. If my partner prioritizes connecting with me sexually so much that he is willing to like block off a chunk of time in a calendar to be like, nothing is going to interfere with us. Like, I know we've got other things we could be doing. People have stuff to do. People have kids to raise
Yeah.
and jobs to go to and grad school to finish and puppies to house train and parents who are sick and friends the other will spend time with and like episodes of Parks and Recreation to rewatch. Like we're busy.
Yeah.
Why? Why would we spend time just like naked and rolling around like puppies in bed with lube between our skin? Why would we do that? The couples who sustain a strong sexual connection over the long term feel like doing that contributes something to their relationship, something unique and something important. And so they are motivated to show up. And they only have sex that they have sex that they enjoy having. And they can find their way to that pleasure because they can identify what state of mind they're in, which is really intuitive for some people and very I actually led a workshop just a couple of weeks ago for a group of therapists, and it was surprising to me how many of them had trouble figuring out which emotions belong in which space. Like frustration. Is that a fear? If you're frustrated by something, is that a frustration is rage. So just being able to notice, like, okay, I'm experiencing this emotion, it goes in this space. Um, what do I know helps me transition out of this uncomfortable space without suppressing it? I want to go through it, as Robert Frost, the poet, advises that we do. The best way out is through.
Mhm.
How do I go through this space, and where am I when I'm done with it? Like when I was done with my stress response in the fear space, I was blopped into one of what I call the bonus spaces, which is like my body. Sometimes we find ourselves in like our cognitive space where like our thoughts are spinning. And you like, this is, if you get into, you like, we set up the time and you get in the bed and you're like waiting for your partner to show up and your brain just like is like, how many dishes are left to do? How many loads
Yeah.
of laundry are left to do? Did we get all the kids' paperwork done for school? Did I finish all of my homework? Like, if you can't shut off your brain, that's you're in that like executive, that like I call it the office space.
Yeah.
And then one of the most important spaces, this like third bonus space that I call observational distance, or the scenic viewpoint, where you can take a one step back from whatever your internal experiences is and witness it from that slight distance, which is so important in order to be able to see, oh, here's where I am. I can experience it without being lost to it, and I can communicate to my partner what my needs are, given that this is where I am. If I hear that you're over in the lust space and you're like, doing the sexy dance of like, let's get to the lust space, and I am in the kitchen of care, I am locked into feeling like I need to take care of everything. And here are the things that I need in order to, like, I can't just let this go. The stakes are high in the kitchen of care. There's something to lose here.
Yeah.
If I can't just drop these plates. Like, this has to get done. And so what I need is not for you to stand there doing a sexy dance. What I need is your help.
Mm,
Does that make sense?
Makes a lot of sense.
yes.
So just the idea of really knowing and understanding what space you're in to be
Yeah.
able to ask yourself those
What puts you
questions of
in
like,
there? What helps you
yes.
get out? Being able to communicate to your partner what it is like for you when you're in there, and how they can, if they are motivated for you to be in a different state, how they can help you to get into a different state.
And that's the switch from you're the problem, fix you, of here is a mutual thing together, right? And I
Yeah.
think for so many people, especially, I know we're probably being quite heteronormative, but especially for many women that feel like I have the lower desire, or I have this, I fix me, I'm the problem. And so many people come into couples therapy like this. If you could just fix our sex life, then we would have
Right.
no problem.
Yeah.
Then
And
it
you're like,
turns
the
out
sex
there's
life is the symptom of like
yes, that
all the
which you're
other
like, "Oh,
things.
ha, ha, ha." But I think but still then that's the shame,
Yeah.
right? If it's me, if I'm the problem, then that's back to the shame room.
I
That
have to say, the shame room is very familiar to people of every gender.
yeah, yeah.
The way it shows up and why and how it's activated, and what behaviors people, what emotions people think they're experiencing when they're experiencing shame
Mm,
are really different. Women somehow have cultural permission to acknowledge shame. Men do not. If you were born, you were given the sort of like, it's a boy list of rules and regulations. You were taught that you don't have that panic grief space. You do not emotionally need anyone. You do not require any help. You do not need connection. It's not your job to take care of anybody else. And you certainly don't need anybody to care for you. Right. And of course, that's a lie. You're a fucking mammal. You require care from other people, and your body thrives when you care for other people also. Right. And we have just deprived half of the human population of their right to give and receive care.
mhm.
the other half-ish of the population, we have deprived from their right to experience rage. So many people raised as women and raised as girls who would grow up to identify as women. I don't think I have a rage room. I don't think I have one of those spaces. And then, like, a few months later, they come back and they're like, how am I supposed to want sex when I am so angry all the time? Sorry. You're not supposed to want like sex. You do not have to want or like sex when you're angry. Transition out of the rage space, like resolve some of your rage. And then, like I say, like you don't always have to want or like sex. This is a really big, like emotional floor plan that you have. And only one of those spaces is the sexy space.
But there's just such a myth, right? I mean, the pressure of this all, I think for so many people
That it's supposed
is
to be easy, that it's supposed to be
yes.
spontaneous. It's supposed to just happen without
Yeah.
effort or
Right.
intention.
Well, and even you
Girl,
talk
no,
about
look at your brain. But like my goal with the floor plan is to be like, look at how much is happening in your brain. Look at how much the world is preventing you from getting to the spaces. Like we're not even supposed to experience baseline pleasure from food and touch and the sunlight on our skin. Like what a waste of time to stand still in the sunlight. Like how are we supposed to prioritize sexual pleasure when, like, what a waste of time. Like when I've got so many other things I could or should be doing. How unproductive of me just to like I have actually seen people try to tie having more sex to productivity as a way to like, here's how to motivate yourself to have sex. You can be more productive if you experience more pleasure. And it's like, yo, you don't have to be productive.
well,
You're
that's
not here. You're not. It's capitalism. I know.
capitalism is capitalizing, man.
White supremacist, cis heteropatriarchal, rabidly exploitative late capitalism that tells you you owe your body to the capital.
Right.
Like,
And I'm thinking also, but it'd be right. So, like, so I'm someone who loves. I'm spent a lot of time in the rage room. I am not anyone who is confused about
right.
that. That's me in a nutshell. But I think that I was sold this idea that rage and sex and lust went together. So in my head, I was sold this
Yeah.
idea that I'm supposed to be angry, and then we're supposed to fumble on the floor and fuck, and it's gonna be
Yeah.
great. And never have I once wanted to do that ever in my life.
It's a really good story, right?
Sexy story, yes.
And because rage is an approach motivation, like approach to destroy, people are kind of like, and that's so like lust is an approach motivation too. It's approach to like fuck.
Right.
Mhm.
So like, what if you're like motivated to approach in one way and then you also kind of want to approach in the other way? Almost never, very rarely. Can you agree that if your biological activated motivation state is to destroy your partner, don't have sex with them in that moment.
Right.
That's like using sex as a weapon to destroy your partner. There's a specific word for that, and it's not sex.
No, I believe in sexual violence, right?
Yes.
Like that. Yes.
That is correct. Sexual assault,
Yes.
sexual violence.
Yes.
And
Okay.
we absolutely do live in a world that tells us that like that's normal, that is part of like what human sexual experience. And it's like I can't say that it's not part of human sexual experience because, as you say, so many of us carry histories of sexual trauma. But one of the reasons so many of us carry histories of sexual trauma is because we live in a world that fucking lied to us, that told us that sex is a weapon.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm so like angry on behalf of everyone who has been taught that.
Right. And I think that's the thing, is so much of this is myths. And so I think the other thing I want to say is, you might pick up this book because you're the person with the lower libido, but this is a book to read together. I want to be really clear about that. Because the other thing is, you give a really one beautiful example of what somebody said about with the folks with a higher libido. Someone said, there's no obligation ever. There's just an open door and a welcome mat always.
Yeah.
And that language, right? No obligation, but the door is always open. That allows there to be safety for me to walk out of my other rooms, to walk into yours in lust. And so
feeling
that
safe enough.
yes, right. So I think so. Even if you're listening to this and you're like, oh, well, that's not mine. This is like, a book for my partner. No, no, this is a book for all of us.
Yeah. And it is sort of like the cultural narrative that in heterosexual relationships, it's the women who are lower
Yeah.
desire. Among couples who seek sex therapy, it's just as likely to be the
Yeah.
man who's lower desire. And of course, there are plenty of same-sex and genderqueer couples who also struggle around differences in sexual desire. For
Mhm.
everyone, differences in sexual desire is the number one reason why they seek sex therapy. And yet, where do we start? We started with the people who have great sex. Don't worry about desire. So I would say like the number one characteristic that differentiates couples who struggle and couples who don't struggle is not whether or not they experience desire, but whether or not they worry about desire.
Wow.
Couples who
Mm.
have great sex lives, think about pleasure. Like, so let's take two couples as an example. One is a couple, they come in and they're like, partner A is like, I was really into the sex before and that was great, but I'd be totally fine if we never have sex again. And I'm going to give them Peggy Kleinplatz as their therapist. She's a researcher and therapist in Ottawa and co-author of Magnificent Sex. If you haven't read it, oh my gosh, read Magnificent Sex. And she'll say to this couple, okay, tell me about the sex that you do not want. And do you think they go on to describe, well, our sex is really connected and pleasurable and fun? Or is it dismal and disappointing? Is it sex by rote? Is it sex because they feel like they have an obligation to their
Mhm.
partner? Is it sex where they feel like they have to pretend to be someone they are not, to have to pretend to enjoy things they do not enjoy? And Peggy, being the genius that she is, will say, well, I rather like sex, but if that's the sex I were having, I wouldn't want sex either. So she'll say, and here's where the work starts, what kind of sex is worth wanting? And that's where the couple has to start. Here's the big revelation. It's not a dysfunction not to want sex you do not like. That's couple number one. They
Yeah.
need to figure out how to access pleasure with each other in a sexual context. And there's all therapy for that. Two, let a couple like me. Suppose my husband and I show up in a sex therapist office and we go, I know that like if I could just get there, we'd have so much fun. I'd feel so connected. I'd be like, that was such a great idea. I really love the sex that we have. It's so great. And like I can't get there. How do I get there? That was me. And I had to figure out where there was, like where, if I'm not there, where am I? And how do I get from where I am to where I want to be? And that was what the emotional floor plan was for. I was stuck in the fear space. A lot of people are stuck in the care space or the rage space or the panic grief space, especially if you've got trauma, you got a lot of panic grief space trap. Or just like like lately, it's been like the body space. Like I am physically unwell. My blood circulation is literally not adequate to maintain like life energy for 12 hours every day. Like I don't have that. So if I'm going to have enough energy for like sexual connection, I need to make sure I deprioritize so many other things to protect the physical energy for sexual connection. Does that make sense?
Yep.
And just the idea that like this is, and you mentioned this earlier of like I think the idea that we're supposed to have this like spontaneous, like we're supposed to move very quickly into that space because our partner's
Oh, that
there
it's
and
just so easy.
it just happens. And so to understand this as like a real journey to get to those spaces or like understand how to move into these different spaces is just, I think, revolutionary in a lot of ways and is just
And
so
I get if
validating.
people are like mad, like it should be easier than that. I agree.
Totally.
It
So
should
a
be
lot
easier.
of a lot
I
of
wish it
things
were
should.
easier.
Right.
Like I wouldn't have had to write a whole book about it if it were
Right,
easier.
exactly.
I wish this world was different, right?
Right.
Like,
I
I'd
wish
like
a lot
yeah.
of things were easier.
I wish having a human brain was different. I
Yeah.
did. Like I wish it were different. And it's hard and it's so much easier if you at least understand how it works. So you're like, I know how to play this game now. I know what spaces exist. I can like learn how to navigate through my own emotional floor plan. I can understand where my partner is at. And now I know how to help them get to the place where we can be together, doing it in a way where like they're not broken and I'm not broken and there's nothing wrong with our relationship. We just like have to navigate the space together.
Emily,
So yeah.
we could talk to you
Mhm.
for the rest of time,
Yeah.
and we're just
I wish
gonna
I would like to.
me
Yes.
too.
That's my
And
favorite thing to talk about.
I mean, it's so you like just your passion, and it's just amazing. And once again, the way in which you describe things is incredible. And so we'll just keep having you back on the podcast as long as you'll come.
Yeah. I'll
But
just start reading the book. We'll read for as long as an hour takes
that would
and
be
come back, read the
amazing.
next.
That would be amazing. That would be
Maybe that's an
ideal.
audiobook.
Yeah.
Then we're
In
not a
fact,
podcast anymore.
Right. Then it turns into an audiobook. But we do a segment on this show called Calling BS. And so we would love to hear for you. I feel like a lot of this
entire episode was
has been
calling
calling BS. But if you were to pick one thing, maybe a few things that feel really important to call some bullshit on, tell us what they would be.
you know, there is one idea that has arisen over and over as I've been traveling with the book tour, that like I think I didn't address it as well as I needed to in the book because I didn't realize people really believe this. Um, so the first characteristic of couples who sustain a strong sexual connection over the long term is that they admire and trust each other. They are friends. And there actually truly are people who have internalized and believe that friendship and sexual connection are antithetical. That if you are friends with someone, it means you don't want to fuck them. And if you want to fuck someone, that means you don't want to be friends with them. And that is not true.
That's the bullshit.
Yeah, that's the bullshit part. I know when Harry Met Sally says that like men and women can't be friends because there's always the question of sex, like anyone can be friends and you can want to fuck them, and like it really helps over a long-term relationship in particular. Like part of the glory of a long-term relationship is your bodies are going to change over the decades. And like you're my best friend whether your genitals behave the same way as they did before or not, and like we're going to find a way to play erotically together regardless of what happens because you're my best friend. Like of course we're going to find a way to connect with each other, and I love that I get to still be here while your body is changing. So friendship is people get really wrapped up in horniness and desire. And like the wild thing that I would like people to try on as an idea is that liking the person you have sex with, I mean, you need a baseline level of like, this is an attractive human being. I like them a lot. I like being around them. When I look at them, I smile. When I see them from a distance interacting with other people, I'm like, I'm proud that I get to be associated with them. You need that baseline.
Yeah.
But liking the person matters so much more than wanting them.
Oh,
That's some good bullshit.
that is some good bullshit. Emily, thank you.
Don't fuck people you don't like.
There it is. There it is. That's
That took me probably my first 10 years of having sex. That was
Yeah.
a really hard fucking
That's
idea
going to be
for
our
me to get.
episode title.
Yeah.
Don't fuck people you don't like. I mean, but for me, growing up in the time that we did and the way that I felt about my body and all the fucking diet culture shit, I was fucking a lot of people. Now I would be like, fuck off, dude.
Yeah.
Like, don't come near
Also,
me.
if you have a vagina, it's not a healing portal.
That's another amazing bullshit.
Just it's not. I mean,
Are you
it can be.
sure?
Under certain very specific circumstances, like it can be, but that's not what it's for.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, I feel like my vagina made life, right? Like a baby came out my vagina. It's a very powerful thing,
Totes.
but it's not to heal fucking anyone else. And
Yeah,
it's not a therapist.
gonna like cure someone else's narcissism.
Right.
Yes.
Just
yes.
for
I think-
example.
yeah. Sex is not therapy. Okay.
Right.
Emily, thank you so much for coming back on. It is always a pleasure. It is an honor. We freak out every time we get to talk to you. Come As You Are, changed my life. Burnout changed my life. Come Together absolutely changed my life.
I'm so glad.
Where can people hear you? Where can they find out more?
The book is available everywhere books are sold. Special shout out to the audiobook. I put a bunch of like extra special effort because there's some like dark stuff in there. So I tried to make it very playful and fun around the dark stuff. And yet, I made the producer cry so hard he had to turn off his microphone while we were recording the trauma section. So I really love the audiobook for this one in particular. I am taking a social media mostly hiatus for my mental well-being, but there is a newsletter. If you go to emilynagoski.com, you can sign up for the Confidence and Joy newsletter where I answer, it's mostly me answering people's sex questions.
That's awesome. Check out Come Together. Everyone can get it. Do the audiobook. The audiobook comes with a PDF too.
Yes. Oh,
Right?
yes.
All
Because
the
you need
goods.
the illustrations. You have to see what other people's floor plans have looked like.
Make your own floor plan. Thank you for being here, Emily.
P.S. My husband is the one who drew them, the floor plans.
I know. I didn't know if you disclosed that because
Yeah,
he was a comic book illustrator or
he
comic creator.
was a comics illustrator, and went to art school and shit and did the whole thing. So I was like, could you
Wow.
draw these for me? That's why the subtitle of the book is The Science and Art.
It's he's part of it.
What an
Yeah.
Easter egg. That's a good Easter egg.
Yeah, I actually didn't realize that it's not in the full, it's in the acknowledgments and it's in the copyright page, but there's nowhere in the text to it. And his signature is in all of the illustrations, but I don't actually say, P.S. These drawings you're looking at were done by the guy I married based on my art direction. I was like, I want it to look like crayon drawings.
And
Well,
it's
now people
amazing.
will know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now we'll know. All the information will be in today's show notes of the episode and all of our social media. Emily, thank you for being here.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode of Shrink Chicks.
We'll see you back here next week for another session.
In the meantime, if you want a question answered or a topic discussed, follow us on Instagram at ShrinkChicks. And if you're looking to get connected with a therapist like us to start or continue your therapeutic journey, visit thetherapygroup.com. Just fill out a contact form on our website, and we will personally match you with one of our amazing therapists. And for all of our therapists and group practice owners out there, we also offer group practice consulting.
And if you're looking to support yourself further and support our show, check out our amazing merch options at shrinkchicks.com/merch and our Know Yourself, Grow Yourself journal on Amazon. Also, if you'd be so kind, we'd love a rating, review, and for you to share with a friend or an enemy or a mother-in-law, honestly, whoever needs it, so that we can keep reaching more people on our mission to bring mental health topics to your ears every week.
Thanks for being here with us. And don't forget to grow yourself. You got to know yourself.